Go.
Oh,
Roger, you're on.
Hello, everyone.
You are live.
Yeah, get off my ear. Get off my ear, Wendy. Yeah, we had this. Yeah, we had this elaborate, funny start, all planned out, and we didn't do it in the end. So there you go. So we're talking about the concept of animal rights, in the sense that you know, the animal rights show has really kind of pointed out over the months really now that, you know, our language in the movement is very welfare based, and a lot of people will kind of defend that. And so in some ways it creates a question, you know, is the lack of animal rights within animal rights, is that something to do with the fact that animal rights itself is too complicated? So I wanted to start off by just reading out something I prepared. Only takes 2 minutes, and it's about Tom Reagan's the rights view. He calls his position, the case for animal rights, the rights view, and it's got some features to it. For example, on the direct duties and indirect duties argument, Reagan will actually side with the utilitarians against the Kantians, although Reagan himself is a Kantian. But ultimately, he rejects utilitarianism, and that's due to its consequentialist nature. Reagan's rights view sees individuals as ends in themselves. They're individuals with rights. The rights view protects individual rights holders by placing a wall or a fence around each and every one of them. So Reagan says that the rights view is cut from Kantian cloth, but with adaptations. So the fundamental principle of Reagan's position, the rights view, is the respect principle. So the fundamental principle is respect principle. It respects individuals, including individuals who are not human. So the rights view does not beg for mercy for other animals. And likewise, it does not ask humanity to be less cruel, and it doesn't focus on cruelty to other animals either. So the idea of don't be cruel or stop being cruel is not part of the rights view. The rights view is a demand. It demands that humans respect other animals as the rights bearers and the rights bearing individuals that they already are, according to the argument. The rights view demands the abolition of the human use of other animals. And that includes areas of animal use which some animal advocates will defend and even promote themselves, such as guide dogs for the blind, or seeing eye dogs, or riding on the backs of horses, the idea of eating eggs from so-called backyard hens, and the eating of honey. The rights view rules all that out. The rights view does not confuse people by using welfare-based language and cruelty talk. It talks about rights holders, rights bearers, and it talks about its opposition to rights violations. That is the rights view. And as you can see from the language that I've just used, that's not really the language of the movement. And so we're back to the question, is animal rights as an idea, a concept, too complicated? So that's what we're going to be talking about.
You've been trying to inject rights into the movement for how many years now, Roger?
Well, it's not me, is it? I mean, you know, I mean, Tom
well, you
Reagan,
and others.
Yeah. But I mean, Tom Reagan couldn't do it. Gary Francione couldn't do it. Joan Denea couldn't do it. You know, Gary Francione now runs a counter movement. He's left the movement, and he's kind of been marginalized completely by the movement. Tom Reagan was treated absolutely appallingly by the movement. So the person who wrote the case for animal rights was marginalized within the animal rights movement. So, you know, we've got to kind of like come to terms with that reality. It's an odd thing to try to analyze, but in a way, that's our job for the next hour, really. You know, what's going on? You know?
Yeah, and it looks like we have just over 20 people with us at the moment. So feel free to let us know your thoughts as we're getting into this, and we'll
welcome everybody.
As much as possible.
Thanks for
Seb's
tuning in.
here, Jennifer's here, vegan Potterhead. So, yeah, well, it's been an interesting ride with the show because, like you've said, I mean, this has been a kind of a product of the lockdown. And I kind of went into it thinking, we could just put these ideas out there and they would just be kind of absorbed. And I think there's been a lot of resistance to that. And I think there's several reasons for that. Yeah, and I don't know. I initially thought rights would be quite simple, and I think it is at a fundamental level. But I think to be able to argue the case for rights does take studying Reagan's position and others to really kind of back it up. And I'm just curious, is that something that we can kind of support the movement to do similar to what we've done? Or is there actually alternative language we can use that kind of sends effectively a rights-based message without explicitly mentioning rights? So that's kind of the question I'm grappling with at the moment. I know for myself, I'll probably still use rights in the toolbox when I'm talking to people. I just don't know if it'll be an essential one I go to every time I have a conversation. But I haven't done outreach for a while now because of the lockdown, so it's quite theoretical at the moment.
My understanding that. Sorry, go ahead, Roger.
No, you go ahead.
My understanding and my experience from working with several activist groups in Athens is that most activists accept the existence of inherent rights. They believe in rights and they advocate for rights. And actually, at some point, we had workshops where the whole point of the conversation of taking turns and playing the role of the bystander and the outreacher was to find a way to steer the conversation towards rights and towards the fundamental wrong. And maybe it was not phrased as the fundamental wrong, but we would talk about the moral issue and what is morally wrong and morally right. And my experience from other activists is that every time they have a conversation, they try to mention rights. That's their aim, their goal. And most times they succeed. And it's actually here, it's a widespread thing. And it's done even by people that don't know who Tom Reagan is, but they use some of his arguments in their outreach. The paradox is that many of the same people use also welfarist language. But I think this has a lot to do with the large organizations and the slogans and the words they use, and that many activists feel that they have to take these posts or these slogans and use them. Actually, I have not met an animal rights activist that does not believe in rights. That's my experience from the movement.
So you said people use. Sorry, just real quickly to clarify, you said people are using Reagan's arguments without knowing Reagan's work. We've literally been, trying to communicate Reagan's work. So maybe that's a secret. Just don't talk about Reagan, and they kind of stumble onto it. I'm curious how this happens.
I don't know who we have to thank for this, let's say, tradition, but yes, they would use Reagan's arguments to explain why other animals have inherent rights and why they should not be excluded from the theory of rights. So it's a common thing. And I've talked to some friends this week, activist friends, and the answer that I got about the welfarist language or the very graphic videos was that they use it as a Trojan horse to attract the attention of the bystanders and then spin the conversation and talk about rights and about individuals and justice.
I think that's a key question right there. If we focus on the individual, can that actually effectively get us to a rights-based position without the philosophical complications and the rest of it?
I don't see that. I mean, I've had a different experience in the sense that I've seen conversations, as it were, live and also online, where it's all cruelty-based language, and every now and again, a kind of rights phrase might be thrown in, but the overwhelming claims making is based on cruelty. Now, when I've asked people about that, they say things like rights are too abstract, and that people understand the issue of cruelty. So you would have to explain rights, whereas you're on the same page about cruelty anyway, which sociologically I think is not true. I think there's a fundamental difference between what the movement thinks they're talking about when they're talking about animal cruelty and its solution, which the movement thinks is veganism. For the public, the culture, they're talking about not being cruel and yet finding a way to still use other animals. And so they're talking about welfare regulations, the way that the politicians would, the way that often the journalists would, and the way that the system talks about it. And so I think there's a fundamental difference. I think that when animal advocates say cruelty, they're saying more than what the culture accepts as internalized as that. And on internalization, I do understand from the point of view of the animal advocate, they've been socialized into an animal welfare language, which is embedded into a movement which calls itself animal rights. So I don't blame animal advocates for it. It's just that you would have thought that once they progress in the movement and learn more about it, and maybe, Jeremy, we're just not visual enough in terms of the Animal Rights Show. Maybe that's what the issue is, because the rights message is not getting out there, but it's never got out there apart from one period in the late 1980s and into the 1990s.
Yeah, and I think you hit on a key point there. To me, the starting point is the language, because I don't think most people in the movement would associate cruelty or suffering with welfarist language or treatment, because I think it's an interesting thing, because I think on the vegan side of the equation, we look at these things and we can't envision a form of use that's not cruel, or a form of use that doesn't involve suffering or abuse or all these things. But to non-vegan, the industry is pushing these messages out there that there is such a thing. So I think when we talk about cruelty, it's almost implying that there's a non-cruel form of use is the risk, I think. And I think that's something that non-vegans will, if we give them the chance, they'll grasp onto it. I know I did before I was vegan.
But vegans argue that, Jeremy, don't they? I mean, they talk about backyard hens and these issues because they themselves have found a non-cruel use. And so
here's one of our first comments, actually, which ties right into that. So it kind of sums it up.
Yeah, I agree.
I think as well, what seems to happen as well is everything that's related to issues of other animals all gets put under the umbrella of animal rights. So whether that's welfarism, where people are seeking better treatment for other animals, or whether it's as we might say, neo-welfarism, where those who say they want rights but pursue it through welfarist campaigns and language, because they might see it as welfare plus welfare plus welfare equals rights. Then you've obviously got another confusion within that of moral rights versus legal rights, because some people, when they're speaking of rights, they talk about giving rights to other animals and changing status through legal means and through laws. And then, of course, you've got the rights-based rights, which is moral or inherent rights that we would talk about, the negative rights of not to be bred or killed or used, oppressed, all those things. And then you've even got someone, you mentioned Gary Francione earlier, he would talk about the only right that he really advocates is the right not to be property. So I think you've got all these kind of confusions within the movement, but it's all under the umbrella of rights. And that's just within the movement before we've even taken that to the streets to the public and people who would have very little to no understanding of what rights are. So it's really important, I think, that we have these conversations of how do we cut through all of that confusion to actually get to the heart of rights. So yeah, and I think it's true. So no, I was just going to say it's true about I think the movement has adopted that dominant paradigm from society through its use of language, single issue campaigns, in the way that it implies distinctions between different uses, rather than all use. So I think that's what's going on.
Historically, it's interesting now, there's a kind of generation gap type thing now, but historically we've always had the confusion in the sense that it's always been claimed that Peter Singer's animal liberation started the animal rights movement. And of course, he doesn't believe in rights. And yet most people who cite and use Singer or even sells Singer don't seem to know that. You know, they don't seem to know that in animal liberation, he says he can't find a problem with free range egg production, for example, right? So we've always had this confusion. Now, Singer doesn't seem to be cited very much in the movement anymore. And in fact, I would say that a lot of modern day advocates wouldn't know who Peter Singer is. Used to be the case that they never knew who Reagan was, but they certainly didn't know who Dineo was, but they always knew who Singer was. And now they don't seem to know who Singer is either. And so whether it's just some kind of welfare lag into this generation, I'm not quite sure, but we've still got the same confusion, but with a new generation. And I think it's probably because of the fact that that generation is coming into an already set up movement, which is kind of saturated with welfare, you know. And so I think that's the way that they think, you know, in the sense that I saw a campaign just the other day, and the complaint for the campaign was that a farm that had been investigated had the red tractor accreditation taken away. And then the complaint from the activists is that the red tractor accreditation has been given back to them. That was the complaint. And that was what created a kind of online rally. But from an animal rights point of view, it's totally irrelevant whether they've got red tractor or not.
Yeah.
You know, it's still a rights violation. You know, and yet we still seem to be very quick to fall into this welfare way of thinking. And obviously it's frustrating for me, you know, but it still remains that there is that question. Maybe what we want as animal rights advocates is too complicated. Is a sense that you have to learn animal rights, but everybody thinks they know animal cruelty straight away. Maybe that's what it is.
I think part of the reason that welfare is kind of still somewhat entrenched is because it kind of speaks to this idea that that non-vegans have been kind of duped in some way in this idea of welfare labels, and it's for activists who maybe aren't kind of fully clued up on the rights philosophy. It's easy for them to point out, like that the label of free range isn't free range. It's never what it actually means, and it's I guess they see it as a kind of entry point, and they think that people will go vegan off the back of that. But I don't think that I don't know if people really fully understand the optics or the implication of these type of messages and how it just perpetuates welfarism, and how people will just kind of, other non-vegans will gravitate towards it because that is a common thing. No one wants to treat animals in a cruel way, whereas the idea of abolition and violation of rights are kind of still, I guess, somewhat avant-garde concepts in the movement, even though they have their own rich history, as you talked about, Roger, you know, with Reagan's philosophy, and then Francione kind of adopting it, and then and that's kind of happened. But I do also think that it's somewhat regrettable that the Francione's demeanor and the way he's portrayed himself and interacted and with other activists and somewhat isolated himself. It's a shame because his work and his writings do promote the rights-based message. And some of the things like I've read, like Rain Without Thunder, in the social media posts that he uses, there is a clarity to the language that he uses, which makes rights kind of, I find easier to understand. I know one of my friends stumbled upon Francione's work in some of the outreach that he's done. He'll ask questions like, do you think that animals value their lives? Do they matter morally? These kind of questions which touch on rights-based themes. He discovered it through Francione's work. But I do wonder whether his reputation has somewhat, made it less likely that people will read his work now or kind of view him as a kind of respectable person, which is to your point that I think you said, Roger, that maybe his work will have a greater impact down the line when maybe he's no longer involved in the movement as much as he is now.
Well, he's not involved in the movement. That's the irony of it.
Yeah.
Do you think?
I mean,
well, I guess that's the question. Did he take rights with him in a way? If people, I don't know, for people who are studying in the subject, do they associate him with rights and almost separate from the broader movement and think actually, focus?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that Francione is in a similar position to what you just articulated, Jeremy, in the sense that he says now that you can talk about animal rights without talking about animal rights, and you don't have to say anything particularly philosophical. And so I think Francione equals abolition now, not rights. So, it would say, Reagan equals rights, Singer equals the kind of utilitarian version of welfare, and Francione equals abolition. But, it's still, what's it called? Animal rights, the abolitionist approach.
Yeah.
But I don't think he talks about rights so much anymore. And so maybe he's coming to the same kind of conclusion that you have, Jeremy.
Well, yeah, and I guess with I can't help but make the language point with abolition. I guess we have to be somewhat mindful of the associations there with human slavery, and not to say not to use the word, but just to be prepared to go there and have a response to that if we do. Well, I think the thing we've been hitting on here is, how can we send out a clear message to outside of the movement if we haven't sorted ourselves out inside the movement? Because a key thing I'm noticing is when people hear rights, they think legal rights, and that gets translated to welfare in every sense of the word now. I mean, I don't know of any, in the near future, I can't see cows, pigs, chickens, turkeys, fishes, and the rest of them getting legal personhood and, getting the same protection as humans, for instance. So I think, I don't know, I just, it's going to be difficult to translate that message in a bit. I mean, we do have a number of comments, so we can start diving into those if we want, unless anybody else has any opening remarks to add. I mean, I think the first one's good for you, Roger. This is your YouTube channel. We pretty much hijacked it, so we might as well let you take the first easy question. What are your thoughts on Steve Best? What are your thoughts on Steve Best, and specifically intersectionality and relating to other movements activists as he describes in his book, The Politics of Total Liberation? You wouldn't know anything about Steve Best's work, would you? I'll hide this in a minute so we're not hiding half of our staff here.
Well,
volunteers, I should say.
Staff, I like that.
No paychecks at the Animal Rights Show, just so we're clear. No Patreons. No secret donors. Sorry.
I've had an interesting relationship with Steve Best in the sense that when I was in the Francione camp, so to speak, he called me, douchebag and all kinds of names, just about every name he could think of. But I mean, he came to Dublin. I spoke to him at Dublin. Interestingly, then he was talking about the rights welfare thing as being a bit of, it's a bit of a kind of dead issue. And yet then he started to talk about it much more himself. And then, his position has always been very sociological. So I've always been very attracted to Steve Best's thing because of that. And of course, the thing that I mainly promote is not the book because it's far too expensive for anybody to buy, but I think somebody ought to kind of hijack it and just put it out on the internet, against his will, I think. But we
can't edit this, Roger. This is live. There's no editing. It's permanently on the internet forever. Everything you say.
Whoever can do that, go ahead. But the thing that I promote is Steve Best's Total Liberation talk from Luxembourg. I think it's 2013. Now it's interesting now because it is a movement issue in the sense that we're talking about the International Animal Rights Conference that takes place in Luxembourg, and for about 3 years, I think that Steve Best was the keynote speaker. He was very popular with the activist community and everything else, and now it's kind of like Melanie Joy and Tobias Leonhardt and a lot of other kind of welfarists and reducitarians who are now featuring in the Animal Rights Conference. So there's been a bit of a shift there. But in terms of Steve Best's position, I think it's very strong. I think he might have the same problem that Tom highlighted with regards to Francione. He's not got a great personality in terms of a social movement. When you're in a social movement, you do need to compromise a little bit, and you've got to have a bit of diplomacy, says me. And
you're qualifying that.
But Francione doesn't have the personality. Steve Best in the past has not. I get the impression that Steve Best has kind of mellowed a little bit and probably wouldn't be as bad. Then there's also another issue, which is his dispute with certain direct action advocates, which we don't need to go into. I don't suppose. I don't think that's what the. I don't think, or at least I don't. Yeah, I don't think that's what the question was talking about. So overall, Steve Best's position is very strong. Analytically, it's very good. It's kind of pro-intersectional, and it's basically saying that we're not strong enough to do it on our own. We can't do what we want to do on our own, and so therefore we need alliance politics. There is an advance on alliance politics, which is an anarchist idea called "We Are Each Other," but that's another question. But that's basically talking about alliances and then taking away all the barriers between all the different constituent parts, so everybody becomes merged together into one holistic kind of block, which is all kind of pro liberation, that kind of thing. But yeah, so I hope I've answered the question. I think I did. But
so yes, thumbs up
for Steve
sounds
Best.
like a thumbs up. Sounds like an endorsement.
Yeah,
because is he quite active these days?
It used to be like this.
Is he still quite active?
No,
or had kind of drifted, not too much recently.
Yeah, I do believe he was lined up to do an AR Zone interview, but that I think was more than, or maybe about a year ago, and I don't think that's materialized.
Gotcha.
So yeah, so. No, I don't think he's very active. His website is still there, but I don't think it's been updated much. There is still Dr. Steve Best kind of website, but no, I mean, in some ways, his perspective would be quite useful now. I would say he's kind of mellow. The mellow version of Steve Best is really good. I'll leave it at that.
Steve Best on weed.
Yeah, the chilled Best. Yeah.
They do say that opens the mind, right? Well, the next comment is basically just clarifying that a right is a way of protecting an interest, which is the way I like to think of it. I think that's really helpful when people are just starting to think about rights. I know Reagan and as Roger, as you highlight, just kind of almost like a fence with a no trespassing sign around the individual, which is another good way to highlight. Is this phone a friend to answer the question?
Sorry, that was on my end. Apologies.
So this is an interesting comment. I think that we could just break apart a little bit, is encouraging people to read The Case for Animal Rights. I know a lot of us on the show are currently reading Defending Animal Rights, which I know, Roger, you've kind of suggested as a more of an introduction.
It's like the book club.
Yeah, it's like a book club. Yeah.
So yeah, I think
chapter 6.
I've read The Case, and I'm now the better part of the way through Defending. I do think that's a better introduction to his work, for a variety of reasons. I don't know what everybody else thinks. But you mentioned the challenge with Steve Best's work is the access to the books, and I wonder if just books in general. I hate to say it, but I think we've got to face the reality. A lot of animal advocates don't read these days, and if they do, it's on social media, very brief things. It's not sitting down and opening up a proper text. So, I mean, part of what we've been doing at the show is trying to get around that, but I'm not sure if that's actually practicable.
To coin a phrase, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I think that I mean, the worst thing anybody could do is pick up The Case for Animal Rights as the first thing that they do. I mean, that would be, as it were, a mistake. It probably always has been.
Which Roger told me after I read The Case.
Yeah, well, I just like to see you.
What are friends for?
Jeremy. Yeah.
Pro cruelty.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
We suffered ourselves there, Jeremy.
Is that what you did too, Tom? Case first?
I did, yeah.
Yeah, me.
Me too.
We're horrible role models.
But it's almost like if you can get through that one, then the next one's a breeze.
Yeah.
Well,
it's more comprehensive.
The question to ask you four who've read this new, as it were, recently, is it sufficiently? I mean, it's a lot more accessible than the case. That's a given. But is it still too complicated anyway? And it would kind of need something like the Almerites show to kind of try and break it down into more kind of user-friendly, bite-sized. Kind of this is the kind of soundbite generation type issue. And of course, philosophy doesn't really go with that too well, and that's maybe one of the problems. People don't think of animal welfare as a philosophy; they see animal rights as a philosophy. So, that's one of the. So, I mean, what do you think? Do you think even defending is a bit too much? Do you think?
In places, it's still quite deep, like you were saying. The putting people in their place, that one's quite deeply philosophical. I think it is good for us to have these discussions and put it into, I think, more practical terms. That would be a thing that sometimes I find myself wishing that there was a practical example of like, oh, what does he mean in this situation? Could he further that and give me an example of where that plays out in reality? I guess that's sometimes what I would find useful, where I guess in philosophical texts, it doesn't always go that way. We stay in the heady realms of thinking and philosophy. So I think that would be useful. And I guess that's where we can have discussions between us and other activists about that.
I actually think that Francione's book, Rain Without Thunder, he does a really good job of summarizing the rights-based approach in comparison to the kind of utilitarian welfare-based approach. To be honest, I would actually say that I found that chapter just easier to read and understand than probably some of the chapters in that Reagan's written in defending animal rights and the case for animal rights. But it's just different. Yeah, it's just different writing styles. But I do hear you that, like Wendy, that some examples would it be perhaps make it a bit easier as well.
Well, I think we're part of the YouTube generation, aren't we? I mean, I know the way I started out was I watched YouTube videos, and you almost kind of imitate others. And I think that we become kind of carbon copies of what we've seen on YouTube in that way, and we don't necessarily challenge ourselves to form our own structure. We kind of, do that mimicking. So yeah, and
well, we're on YouTube now, aren't we, Jeremy?
I shouldn't talk it down too much, should I?
No, I'm not meaning that. But I mean, the thing is, somebody giving, as it were, a lecture on Reagan's philosophy would just be as boring as reading a book, probably from that point of view. But I mean, we did joke about a book club before. I mean, maybe this is a forum where we could go through Reagan's work kind of idea by idea or chapter by chapter and just, kind of outline. You could almost have a PowerPoint outline what the basic idea of each chapter is, and then we can talk about it. Maybe that would help people read it, because obviously there's nothing that could really replace that as the best, the ideal type. But if we could help people read the book, then we would have done a good job then, wouldn't we?
I think that was a key point, though. The practical. Sorry, go ahead, Wendy.
No, so go ahead, Nella.
Okay. I believe that quite useful for another reason. Also, there is a barrier of language for many people, and although most are able to watch a video and have no problem with understanding the English language, it's not the same thing reading a philosophical text. So, unpacking some of that chapter by chapter would be very helpful for many people, I think.
Yeah, and as we said earlier, books can be quite expensive as well. So sometimes it can be a financial restriction. But I was just thinking it's quite interesting because I think people are absorbed and socialized into their environments. And if you go back sort of back to the 80s and 90s, you would have had a lot more e-zines and people would have been trying to read things and magazines and books, whereas now, like Roger, you alluded to earlier, that people are very much in the first thing they're going to is YouTube and watching the YouTubers and that language and kind of mimicking, like you were saying, Jeremy, as well, mimicking the kind of styles or the language or using the footage or whatever it might be, all coming into someone like AV, and that's the kind of exposure. So I think people are obviously a product of the exposure that they arrive into in the movement. So, and I think books are just not that sexy anymore, are they? In this day and age, I think people just don't naturally go for books so much. So I think anything we can do to make that more accessible in this, in this kind of social media culture would be helpful, for sure.
It's kind of like starting over, isn't it? But I'm tempted to say yes. Otherwise, we're all out of a job. Yeah. I mean, I think just going through more of the comments. I mean, this is something we often talk about on the show, is that people refer to animal rights more just in the name, but what is actually meant to that? And then if rights do come up, then it gets translated down to those other things we've already covered, legal rights and welfare and the rest of it. Ronnie's made a language point. Maybe we can unpack a little bit. Go ahead, Roger.
Can we go back? Can we go back to the other one? Just
since you asked nicely.
Yeah, thank you, Jeremy.
Ronnie was getting all excited then.
Everyone's been very patient for us to get to the comments.
Yeah. Well, we've only got 20 minutes, so I'll just keep talking so Ronnie doesn't get on. I tend to agree with this in the sense that animal rights has been used rhetorically, and that's one of Francione's main points, is the fact we use it as a label, and that's all. And like now, there are certain people now who, amidst all the cruelty talk, they kind of throw in the word violate now and again, as though that translates it to animal rights, and that doesn't do that either. So I kind of tend to agree with this, actually.
And back to the earlier point, even if someone refers to rights violations, unless they've internalized the philosophy and are prepared to defend it, I'm just not sure even just sprinkling rights violations in there necessarily plugs the hole. I think we've got to, whatever language we go with, and it's a very personal thing. I think what language we choose to use is a very personal topic, and we've all, go about it in our different ways. But I think we've got to be prepared to stand behind our words. So, yeah, it's not no quick fixes, I don't think.
I partially agree with that statement. I actually believe that most vegans don't understand animal rights, but I feel that most activists understand animal rights. That's the distinction I make.
Interesting.
I think even people who are not...
Right.
Sorry, Ronnie.
Make them wait. No. Make them wait.
I think even people who admit that they're not an animal rights advocate, for example, Peter Singer, though, they still didn't he say something like, "Oh, I've just given up correcting people now," and he just will allow himself to be called an animal rights advocate, even though he's totally not.
Not always. I mean, there is a modern day video where he stops the interview right at the beginning and says, "I just want to make a pedantic point." And another complication, of course, is that utilitarians will talk about legal rights until the cows come home, vegan phrase. So there is that complication. I mean, Animal Liberation, the book, starts off talking about women's rights. So unless you've got some level of knowledge, let's say, you probably need some help in unpacking all that. I mean, like there's a famous kind of sentence from Singer where he says, if humans have rights, then other animals certainly do. That's me paraphrasing. But most people then think, animal rights. But the operative word was the beginning of the sentence, if. because he's saying if humans have rights, which he doesn't believe, then other animals do. But his position is that other animals and humans don't have moral rights. And he would certainly say that moral rights and the rights position Reagan is not the best way to found the claims making of a social movement. That's the fundamental disagreement between Reagan and Singer, really, is the fact that Reagan, I mean, if you read Reagan looking back at the case, Reagan thought that he'd started the animal rights movement. And in fact, there is an interesting audio which includes Gary Francione, Anna Charlton, and Bob Linden of Go Vegan Radio. And they're talking about Reagan shortly after Reagan died. And they did really think, for a brief moment, there seemed to be a possibility that the animal rights movement had been born because of Reagan. And that's what Reagan thought he'd done. And you could tell he's almost tearfully writing later, I completely failed. I wasn't able to do it. I wasn't able to persuade the animal rights movement to be an animal rights movement. I mean, it's quite a sad story in a way.
Well, to build off your point, if, Peter Singer can't be the only one that rejects rights for both humans and other animals. I mean, back to our earlier point, I mean, is that not a case to be focusing on the individuality of other animals as a case to them not being, used in all of other forms of rights violations that, obviously depends how we frame it. But, is that actually a case that we could be alienating part of our audience if we are focusing on rights? Does that question make sense? Say that again, but differently.
My answer, no. My answer to that has always been that there are some people who want to base the animal rights movement on animal rights. I mean, I always struggle because it's kind of like almost comical to have to say this, that there are some people in the animal rights movement that want to actually make animal rights central part of the animal rights movement. And so in some senses, everybody else who nevertheless still use the name are kind of getting in the way of that endeavor. And so in a sense, you could say that the media, the politicians, and the public in general have never really had the chance to assess the claim that other animals are rights bearers and that to use them are rights violations, because it's all mixed up in this welfare stuff. And so the kind of pristine animal rights case has never really been made to them. And so I've always thought, well, look, if you don't believe in rights and you reject them for whatever reason, then don't call yourself animal rights. So that means that the people who do want to base the movement on rights could, as it were, have the name animal rights. Again, it's almost comical to have to try and appeal to people and kind of go, excuse me, welfarists, can we have our name back? I mean, but that's essentially what we're dealing with here.
It's a similar thing with veganism, though, isn't it? Because with veganism is a philosophy against all oppression, and it's ethical by default. But now it's almost like you have to say, "Oh, I'm an ethical vegan," as opposed to anything else. And then, because it's been diluted in so many ways, like you've got, people not considering the scope of veganism to be against all oppression. It's now seen often by a lot of people as a diet, which is obviously not, because it's we should say plant-based. And then sometimes, like if you're looking at products, vegan, it means containing no products that are stolen from other animals, but it doesn't mean vegan in its essence, because it might still be tested on animals. Whereas cruelty-free, you would think would also mean vegan, but it doesn't. So cruelty-free just means that it hasn't been tested on other animals. So they're not actually synonymous. And so you've got all this dilution of veganism as well, with the whole, in a similar way, in that you almost want to reclaim the word vegan because it's just been so diluted.
I wonder if there's an element of kind of clickbait kind of going on, just the idea that people have an idea, be it a variety of ideas of what animal rights is. So just use that label, get their attention, and then we'll kind of talk about our version, our diluted version. Same with veganism, and you see this online a lot with even some videos and just the media generally. And I wonder if some of that is kind of rubbed off on people in our movement, where they just they don't care if the title of what they're kind of espousing matches with the rhetoric, or there's a mismatch of values, or they, I don't know.
I see people using the word welfare now, Tom, quite a lot. Even polls, why did you become vegan? Health, environment, animal welfare. There's no animal rights in the poll.
That's one for Jeremy to sort out, I think. Should get on those polls, Jeremy.
Yeah, actually, StreamYard doesn't do the polls. We used to do lots of polls on the Zoom calls, didn't we? I think that's a tricky one. And
no, you did, Jeremy. You did, Jeremy. You did, Jeremy. You did.
Well, I think that's something that came up in our first discussion, didn't it, Roger? The whole almost this gatekeeping of who can call themselves rights. And I think it's a really difficult balance, because you don't want to just say everything is rights, because obviously to the point, that dilutes it. But if I think, to me, the standard should be, if people are open to learning and grounding, their advocacy and rights. Because if we restrict rights to everyone who studied Reagan, I mean, we'll be able to have a small party, but I'm not sure we'll have a movement out of it. How many people have studied Reagan?
No,
I think that's.
I think it's a horrible thing, actually, because this thing about you're not vegan, you're not rights, you're not this. This is a horrible thing to do within a movement, but it happens all the time in all movements, and also political parties. You're not a socialist and all that. You're not a real conservative, whatever, right? At the same time, not everything can count as X. So if there's something like animal rights, not everything. But as Wendy said, it's almost as though we've got a movement now where everything just gets thrown into this box marked animal rights, and it's a bit of a muddle. And so you're looking through the box, and you're having to pick out the little bits that are actually animal rights. But then it's difficult to argue that when there's other people who claim that everything in that box is animal rights. Like what difference does it make? It's all to do with the well-being of other animals. And so for some people, rights and welfare will intermingle and go together and stuff. And so it's not really an issue. Single issues and abolitionism can blend together. That's not an issue. There's a lot of interesting arguments to it. And it is very uncomfortable to start saying to somebody else, well, actually, you're not getting it, mate, type of thing.
Probably want to say.
Speaking of not getting it, mate, it's time for running, I think.
Well, real quickly, because he was brought up and also talking about the idea. Seb's made an interesting point that, and this isn't somebody saying he's not vegan. This is literally Peter Singer himself identifies as a flexible vegan, which I think to me underscores why that philosophy isn't really consistent with even if cutting out rights and the deeper philosophies. I mean, just veganism, which I think most people can get their heads around. He doesn't, Singer doesn't identify with that. So why would we ground our positions on his? But yeah, it is time for Ronnie.
Well,
Ron.
Going back to the earlier point.
you get 2 more readers and then that's it. I'm cutting you off. All right.
I was actually only joking, but on this point, right? It's quite interesting because the
doesn't sound like you were joking.
No, yeah. Ronnie would be tearing his hair out if he had any. Most people don't know that Peter Singer isn't vegan, but people like the vegan strategist Tobias Leonhardt would argue that not being vegan is the quickest way to get a vegan world, and so we need to lower the bar to make the vegan movement as big as possible. And essentially, he thinks that we should redefine veganism to mean vegetarianism, and therefore there'll be as many vegans as there are vegetarians, and then you'd have a bigger movement. And then presumably the idea is that once we've suckered everybody into this veganism, which is not really veganism idea, then you tell them at some point in the future what veganism really is. I suppose that's the plan. So, there's always a lot of people who would argue that, veganism is still a bit of a scare word, and the best thing to do is be a flexible vegan or a flexitarian or reducitarian, because you're not going to scare people away. I mean, you know, that's the answer to that argument. We're more purist about it. We think that telling the truth has got value, and that being consistent morally has got value. And so having a consistent moral message is the thing that we value very much as individuals, and we think that's the best way to advocate. I mean, if there's people who are veganish, that's fine. That's veganish. It's not vegan. That's good.
Yeah, I think that the problem with that, I was going to say, is just you kind of lose like the core ethic of what animal rights is about. You know, like justice, respect for all, through that kind of approach of, okay, you know, we're welcoming everyone, we're welcoming all these different approaches that kind of, some may be vegan, some may be vegetarian, it's, you know, ending suffering, all this kind of stuff. I think that one of the reasons that you know, Singer may be sort of revered in his work is, I guess at the time when he wrote Animal Liberation, he was talking about things like speciesism, which was, I guess, a fairly new concept, and maybe no one had written about that, and no one maybe speak on that. So he did give arguments for people to go vegan at that time, but then it's obviously he never fully embraced rights and talks about, you know, eating eggs from happy chickens, and the ethic and gets lost, and it becomes more of this a virtuous way of being, rather than just a kind of baseline principles. And that's the danger, I guess, that which we're seeing the effect of that in our movement.
Even advocates for humane slaughter, doesn't Singer, which baffles the mind.
Yeah.
But I think we should go to Ronnie.
One advantage of Animal Liberation is it's a lot easier
Ronnie.
to read. Come on, Ronnie! Let's have Ronnie. Come on.
Actually, I believe that Ronnie's statement is absolutely true. There is a lot of abuse that is not connected to use, a lot of oppression that has nothing to do with use. So I think that the word use does not cover everything.
Talking about the climate crisis. And we did, for those who haven't seen it, we did a couple of videos around the definitions, particularly in the second one. We really got into the language. I know for myself, I focus on the 4 key ones: bred, use, displaced or killed. I think to me that encompasses most of it. You know, climate crisis, I think both displacement and being killed. And the displacement side of it was thanks to your inspiration, Ronnie. So thanks for that, because I do think it's good to be very objective in what we're talking about. Otherwise, people are left saying, well, what about humane slaughter and some of these things we were just discussing? Well, we've got another question here is, do you think rights and welfare concepts are linked?
Ronnie's question.
Burning through all your extra chances. Do you think rights and welfare concepts are linked in terms of the concept that rights are there and have to be recognized as an aid to welfare? And I think this touches on a point that I've been grappling with recently, because even welfare reform is technically implemented through legal rights, which is, in effect, grounded in moral rights. And I know part of the Animal Rights Show is aiming towards simplifying things, which I realize that statement is not exactly doing. But I think it's just important for us to tether. I've started tethering my positions and my framing more towards treatment versus use. And I'm not sure if rights is necessarily doing that. If we're in a welfarist movement, if people start talking about rights, I think, as we mentioned earlier, I think they're just going to translate it down to welfare until they've, really internalized it. And the crowd is speechless.
Could you see that question again, Jeremy? Could you put that question, vegan question back up again?
Yeah, go ahead, Tom, if you had.
I was just going to say that, if you look at some of the legislation, for example, in the UK, animals who are farmed, so the legislation, it'll be like, animals who are farmed have to have a level of stimulation to kind of keep them psychologically healthy in that sense, and that is kind of a recognition of a right per se, I guess, but it's always framed in this idea that it's cocooned in this idea that the animals are property of another person. So it's not the full. It's like an impoverished little right, I guess, in that sense. Which does that make sense?
It's the right to welfare while being used.
Yeah.
Mm.
And a lot of the biggest
And so-
advocates now for pro. Oh, sorry, Roger. I thought you paused so long though. I thought you finished.
You gotta jump in there. Steal the stage.
A lot of the biggest pro-welfare kind of bodies now as well are actually in the industries that are profiting the most from the use of other animals as well, because they are obviously trying to, bring welfare in the laboratories, make the other animals more comfortable, or or bigger cages, or a different way of stunning before slaughter, all those kind of things. These are people actually in these industries who are trying to advocate for much higher welfare, but they will never. It's in their interest never to advocate for the end of the use of the other animals. So it almost feels like the two they are linked in a way, but they're always going in opposite directions in a way, I feel.
I think it takes us into a difficult place. Excuse me, I'm getting blasted by the sun. So, but
It's like an eclipse.
it takes us into a difficult place.
I was gonna say, whatever you do, Roger, don't go into the light. Don't go into the light.
No. feel like Dracula or something. But we're at a difficult place when you talk about rights to welfare, in the sense that I remember a TV interview that Earthling Ed did, and I was quite disappointed in the sense that they were talking about being a butcher at one point, and then the butcher mentioned the fact that they also owned an abattoir, and in the abattoir everything was fine, and that the other animals were stunned before they were killed. And Earthling Ed said, yeah, but the stunning doesn't work all the time. And the other guy said, yes, it does. And Earthling said, no, it doesn't. And it went backward and forward. So would a right to welfare be that it would be guaranteed that the other animals would be properly stunned before they're killed? Doesn't seem to much of a right, and so to actually get kind of embroiled in those ideas, I think kind of increases the confusion, if that makes sense, because it certainly would mean then that you start to argue for, we need this reform or we need this law. I mean, again, going back to the red tractor thing, lots of advocates start to talk about high welfare and red tractor problems, that that this farm has not lived up to the red tractor label. So what? It's irrelevant from an animal rights point of view. Whether they've got the accreditation or not is irrelevant. I mean, you always know that you can go into any farm along the street and you'll find rights violations. Isn't that all we need to know? And so I think it takes us into it muddies the water, I think.
Yeah.
And anybody's still out there in my dark land?
We're still here.
It does.
Follow our voice.
I feel that most activists in the street would not give that kind of answer about other animals being successfully stunned or not. They would turn the conversation towards the fact that there is no humane way to kill a sentient being, someone who wants to live. That's what I hear from the activists in the street. They would not get in details about successful or unsuccessful stunning or other welfarist reforms. So
the thing is, though, there's no humane way to kill someone who doesn't want to die.
Real quickly. Yeah.
That's what most activists would say in the street. I mean, that's what I hear.
Yeah, and we know YouTubers. We don't know, philosophers that wrote the case for animal rights in the 1980s. Unfortunately, that's just the reality of the movement. And I think, follow on from that point is that the focus on welfarism. And I don't think it's intentional, to be fair. I think it's unintentional, but it is there. That
they've been social. I mean, these guys are not being vegan for very long. I mean, it was a couple of months ago when I think Carbstrong was celebrating the fact he's been vegan for 6 years, and everybody's going, no, nobody can be vegan for 6 years, kind of thing. I mean, Earthling Ed has been vegan still for less than 5, I think, so coming up to 5. So, you know, these people have not been vegan very long, and they've been socialized by the existing movement, which is welfare based. Going back to what Nella said, I see that claim a lot. There's no way to kill someone who doesn't want to die. There's no humane way to kill someone who doesn't want to die. But what if there was? It wouldn't make any difference either, would it? From our point of view, it'd still be wrong. It'd still be a rights violation. If there was a slaughterhouse in which it was humane by a reasonable definition of what that meant, you know, a completely painless death, you know, temple grandin, you know, winding things so the other animals are less aware of what's going on and all the rest of it. The most perfect slaughterhouse from the point of view of humane would satisfy welfarists, but would not satisfy rightists. That's a fundamental difference, isn't it?
Yeah,
That's why we've got to set that clear end goal. Yeah.
But I think the way they mean it is that it's unfair to kill somebody any way you use. I mean, you cannot violate the right to life. That was the basic argument most activists use. I mean, that you violate by killing someone, you violate their right to life. So I think
it's not the same argument, Nella, is it? If you're saying do not violate rights, that's one thing. If you're saying there's no way to humanely kill, that's not the same argument at all, is it?
No, it's not. I think it's a way to make the person that you have the conversation with to stop thinking about welfarism and reforms and more humane ways to kill someone. It's at the beginning of
the way that I would think about that is that a lot of people would go, okay, well, let's make it humane then, because they're brought into a culture in which, you know, humane use is the promise, and so if humane killing is not happening somewhere, then something's gone wrong with the system that they've got in their mind. And so their solution would not be go vegan or abolish animal use or anything in the kind of rights space. It would be we need to regulate the shit out of this to get it back onto track again. So something's gone wrong with the regulation.
I was just going to
should be in politics, Roger. Regulate the shit out of it.
Technical term.
When I hear the word humane described, I often hear activists describe, you know, the meaning of the word, compassion and care, of just to kind of contrast that with the act of killing itself, and to show that all killing is wrong. I mean, it could obviously, when you're talking about humane other situations in which, you know, there's an animal who's very poorly and unwell, it could be in their interests to be euthanized and put down. I don't know if that's technically, that is still killing, but it's with a thought for their own their life.
The question then is, why is killing wrong? And the kind of thing about the stunning thing doesn't work is, well, it hurts them, or it's painful, or it's a horror thing to go through. Yeah. If the stunning was working, they'd be totally unconscious, and they wouldn't know anything about it. So why is that wrong?
Yeah.
What do they say to that?
Mm.
And I think that's the trouble.
I mean, we say it's wrong because it violates rights, but what do they say?
And that's the trouble. If there aren't people out there putting the rights-based view forward, that is never on the table, because people are always going to be in that welfare paradigm, that conversation about welfare. And if you take it to its nth degree, and we did have these amazing slaughterhouses where, you know, every other animal was just given an injection and then killed, most of the population would be totally on board with that. And that's where there's a disconnect. It's like we're giving out mixed messages. We're saying, we want you to be against cruelty, and we want you to make a change because you're against cruelty. And people are saying, yes, I'm already against cruelty. but then there's
everybody's
I'm
against cruelty.
Yeah. So they don't see the connection. They don't join the dots of making that change because they already feel that they're on board in the same mindset. But
it's one of the core.
We think we're agreeing with each other and we're not.
Yeah, we're past each other.
Yeah, it's total disconnect.
It's one of the it is one of the core teachings of speciesist society. We tell our kids not to be cruel to other animals, and that's one thing that is generationally we say that, but that doesn't mean you can't eat them and kill them and stuff, because it's not.
I think, and to make a bit of a pedantic point, but I think it's a necessary one. I think when we get into these rights-based conversations, if we're not prepared for where they might go, I think we can expose ourselves to certain discussions and doors being open that we don't want to open. I think right to life, for instance, has a bit of a hole in it because we actually, our fellow animals that we're focusing on shouldn't be bred in the first place. So it's not a matter of them having right to life. It's a matter of them not being bred, which to me is about respect. So, and this is, if people want to study Reagan, they want to talk about rights, they feel confident about that, I say they do it. But from my perspective, let's talk about individuals and let's talk about respect, because you don't breed someone into existence for net negative life. And then it doesn't matter what happens once they're there, it all flows from that fundamental wrong. So if we're going to tether everything to this right to life, unless we're talking about free living beings.
And some people would
I'm about to get fired up here, so somebody jump in.
So some people would actually say by breeding other animals, you're giving them life. I had a conversation with someone who breeds dogs the other day, and his mindset was totally, I am giving these dogs life where there wouldn't be life, and there needs to be breeders, otherwise we wouldn't have any dogs. And it was like, breathe. Okay, but some people would have that view that they are giving life. So
this may be a bit of, I've heard this comparison being made, and I think I might have read it. I can't remember who I wrote it, who wrote it, but it was a comparison of human context actually. And it was, if you were bringing in a child into the world and you knew that they were going to be exploited, you knew that they were going to be abused, it was a given. You wouldn't do it. I know that's it's a bit more of there could be other complexities going on with that, but it is when those animals are bred into existence, it's perpetuating the property paradigm. It's basically saying it's okay because they're going to be owned and this forth, and it's not. It doesn't solve the primary goal, which is to kind of give animals their own autonomy and freedom and the rights that they should have. Yeah.
It's one of the complicating factors about animal rights theory. When people learn that there wouldn't be as many other animals in an animal rights world than there are now, although that's not entirely true, it means that there would be less domesticated other animals, but there would be more free living beings. So there'd be a kind of switch in that sense. So there'd probably be actually an abundance of other animals. In fact, something that David Attenborough talked about, funny enough, in his Netflix thing, which obviously is not a vegan thing, but he talks about how we need to rewild, the wild areas and this kind of stuff. And there would in the vegan world, because we would be able to give back so much land to free living beings. It's just that we would have to cut down. Well, we'd have to end the domesticated other animals that we breed. That bit would end, and through that process, we would then create a lot more space for free living beings. But it is an initial kind of difficulty for people to think you're actually kind of like, again, springing them into, you want to make them extinct. They often put it that way. And of course, in some senses, that's true. But it's not easy to argue it, I suppose.
And that's it. I think we've got to be prepared to defend our position, whatever that may be. I'm just going through the comments here. It's a fantastic conversation happening in the thread there too. I've had a quick skim. I think I've gotten to all the key questions. So if we haven't gotten to your specific comment, maybe we can loop those in next time. But we've hit the hour mark, and we originally pegged for an hour. So we're trying to be time centric here. So any closing thoughts? Well, this is your channel, Roger. Do you want to choose how we wrap this thing up? Do you have any cheeky outro you usually add on your videos, or how do we do this?
No, I got a serious one, which is that there's no way that we can tackle this issue in an hour, but we just wanted to, again, kind of put it on the table almost. And again, it's just, I don't know. My situation is that I would like to give rights-based animal rights a try within the public arena, and present that to journalists, and present that to the movement, and present that to the public, if you like. But there's a block to it. The animal rights movement is a block to animal rights, as we five see it. And I think that we kind of almost like need to clear away, because I would like, and I wanted this for more than 30 years. I would just like to see how it plays out. You know, is the animal rights position, you know, would it work? Is it going to be feasible? Is it going to be completely rejected, or is it going to be embraced once people understand what the animal rights position actually is? Because I think it's a stronger position. I think it's the strongest position that there is. It means that we're honest with people, we're very straightforward, and we've got a reason for all that. Other animals are rights bearers, and to use them and to exploit them, to oppress them, that's a rights violation. I think that's a kind of beautiful message. It never gets out there. It's not the message of the animal rights movement, which is almost weird, and it's been weird to me for more than 30 years, that the animal rights movement does not talk about animal rights much. And in my PhD, I used this phrase. There's a book called "There Ain't No Black in the Union Jack," and I used the phrase "There ain't no rights in the animal rights movement." And it's almost like how the hell did that happen? That's where I am. Now, how is the animal rights movement devoid of animal rights? It's weird to me. That's my closing
Maybe that's a
statement.
question we can address in our next show.
That's my jokey way of finishing there, Jeremy.
Very jokey. Well, my defense is I wasn't here, so this movement was mucked up when I got into it, so I'm not taking any fault for it.
It's Ronnie Lee's fault, everybody. Okay.
And hey, Roger, you were there too, so. All right. Well, with that, please do follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We're playing around with different platforms. This is our first one on YouTube, which I think has actually gone quite well. I think it's better suited to these long-form discussions. So we do appreciate that feedback. I think we'll still work in the Zoom calls occasionally.
Just
that,
I think on a technical point, Jeremy.
That's your last. That's your last. Let's go back.
Are people able to? I mean, are we able to carry on the conversation in the comments? Yeah.
Sorry, I was mucking around. I completely missed that.
Yeah. There I am, asking a serious question, and what happens? So because this is on YouTube, it's going to presumably become a YouTube video, so we can carry the conversation on, so we can get onto YouTube, onto my channel, everyone, and comment in the comments after we're off. Yeah, okay.
It'll take maybe like 2 minutes, and then it's rendered, and it'll be on as a static video. If you joined us halfway through, you can watch it from the beginning. And yeah, let's keep the conversation going in the comments, because as Roger said, this isn't going to be addressed in an hour, and we're curious what everybody else thinks. You know, should we be focusing on skilling up the movement to understand the philosophy of animal rights, or perhaps focus on the language and get to it a different way? That's all I got. All right. We'll see everybody in the next show. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Everyone.